There are many big names that are synonymous with All Elite Wrestling, from Hangman Adam Page, Kenny Omega, the Young Bucks, Tony Storm, Mercedes Moné. The list could go on forever, but when you think about who the heart and soul of AEW is, only one name comes to mind, and that person is Eddie Kingston. Ever since he first debuted for the company back in during the pandemic, Eddie Kingston has defined what it means to be all elite. He has defined the very opportunity that AEW has presented talent like himself to shine in a place that fosters their growth, that fosters their relevancy, that fosters their ability to do what they grew up dreaming to do, and that is tell stories through professional wrestling. Eddie Kingston, ever since he debuted for the company, has been that drumbeat, has been that heart, has been that spirit, has been everything it means to be AEW, and that is why his return this coming Saturday at All Out 2025 is such a big deal. He has been nursing a knee injury that has kept him out for the better part of a year, and ever since then, people have been waiting to see how, what, where Eddie Kingston would go. And now we're getting a little bit of clarity with that. But we also need to understand just how big of a deal this moment is going to be. Not only is AEW going to get back a person who was very much a presence on their TV for the better part of the last 4 to 5 years, but they're getting back someone in the locker room that I think AEW has missed a lot. If you go back and watch many of the backstage vignettes or the backstage behind-the-scenes content that AEW would produce, Eddie Kingston was always looked at as a guy who was rallying the troops. Eddie Kingston was always backstage, riling people up. He was a guy who was seen doing big backstage gestures and speeches, and it genuinely felt like he was a locker room leader for AEW. And during a time where Kenny Omega is no longer a full-time talent, during a time where MJF is seldomly there, where your only real legends are people like Mercedes, people like Hangman, people like Bryan backstage who are there week to week. And while all those names are good, you do need someone who is a little bit different and had a little bit of a different path, because everyone I just mentioned was already a made person or was on track to being a made person before they joined AEW. Eddie Kingston's story is nothing like theirs. Eddie Kingston worked his way to get that opportunity in AEW. Eddie Kingston did the indies. Eddie Kingston spent his time growing his name, doing whack angles like running over a kid in TNA to get to AEW in order to live out his dream. And that is why I truly believe he represents the very best of AEW, because AEW is not simply a company. We understand they are there to make money. We understand at the end of the day that is Tony Khan's main objective. But what AEW and any competition to the main company of WWE means to professional wrestling is more opportunity for the fans, more opportunity for the wrestlers alike. Because for the fans, we get the best of both worlds. We get to see different styles of wrestling, new stars have their stories told. We get to see the rise of new acts, the rise of wrestlers who probably would not get a second look in WWE. That is why we watch. And for the wrestlers themselves, it's very similar. They get the opportunity to prove themselves. They get the opportunity to shine on North American TV in prime time, and they get the chance to do what they do best. And it is something that was not available for nearly 20 years after WCW went out of business. Sure, there was TNA, and TNA did the best they could to highlight their talent, but it was never perceived at the level that AEW is today. When you compare just from how big they are and what they mean from a landscape perspective, AEW is probably the biggest wrestling company ever since WCW, and it's not even close. And much like Eddie Kingston, they had to do a lot of work in order to get to that point. And when Eddie does return and he gets that big standing ovation, he gets that big pop, he gets that big adulation from the fans, it is not going to just be an adulation from the fans. I think there's going to be a lot of excitement backstage, because what we see from Eddie Kingston on screen is obviously very charismatic. He wears his heart on his sleeve. He is going to tell you just what he feels about you at every turn. I think you're going to see a lot of that backstage as well, and that's the cool thing. And I also believe that Eddie Kingston is one of those guys who, compared to a Mick Foley of his era, he might not be what you believe is a prototypical pro wrestler. He might not have the six-pack. He might not have the great technical prowess, but somehow, some way, he wills himself into some insanely good matches. Somehow, some way, the man is one of the best promos in wrestling, and somehow, some way, Eddie Kingston does something that is very hard to do in pro wrestling. He makes the fans feel. That is what pro wrestling is all about. That is what AEW is trying to do and trying to bring back to pro wrestling. And that is why Eddie Kingston's return is so important. I think that while Eddie Kingston is not necessarily the guy you might think is going to be a multiple-time world champion, I do think that Eddie Kingston is that spirit that is going to come back to AEW, is going to try and salvage what is left of the company in the wake of this Jon Moxley storyline. And I do think, in a weird way, we somehow, some way could get to the point where Eddie Kingston gets a run with the World Championship. I'm not saying it's going to be a long one, but a moment that will live on forever. Eddie Kingston is genuinely one of those guys where if he wins that World Championship once, and even if he loses it a week, a month later, everything that he did to get to that moment is going to be worth it. And it is going to resonate with the fans. It is going to resonate with the locker room. It is going to resonate with everyone. Because at the end of the day, Eddie Kingston's ability to make us all feel is undeniable. Will he do it, though? Hey, I guess we'll see.